Everyone, and welcome back from spring break. We are now entering into creative nonfiction, which is a good segue from our fiction unit because a lot of the methods that are used in fiction carry over into nonfiction. Okay, so creative nonfiction, as opposed to, say, fiction, where in fiction you're writing about things that haven't happened in the real world, right? We're kind of creating or making it up, even though it might be based on the real world. It's something that comes out of our imagination. These people and the places most oftentimes may not even be real. But in creative nonfiction, the focus is on the self. Okay, it requires a kind of personal preference. And in that sense, the I or you are a protagonist, the central focus of the piece. So essayists always insert themselves in some fashion in their own essays or their memoirs or what have you. Creative nonfiction demands self-discovery. Essays encourage authors to learn as they go. So as opposed to fiction and creative nonfiction, you will be responding maybe to events in your life where you're kind of taking two sides, right? You show through, scene about something that happened, right? As if you're taking kind of a step back and you're painting a picture for the reader, but then you get closer to the reader after that event and maybe analyze it a bit or explain what was happening, right? So in that way, the narrative distance shifts often in creative nonfiction in ways that doesn't happen so much in fiction. It allows flexibility of form and takes a literary approach. Creative nonfiction borrows techniques from both fiction and poetry. It insists on veracity. Authors may take liberties with the facts to tell the story, however, they must maintain an accuracy of interpretation. And this kind of answers the question a lot of people have when they start writing creative nonfiction is, how are you sure that what happened in your life really happened? And are you worried about, fudging the truth? How truthful do you have to be? So the key here is that creative nonfiction, think of it as kind of a container or a shape for your experience that a reader would want to read. That means that you might have to delete events or twist events a little bit to make sure that you're getting that arc that we get in fiction, that rising and falling tension that keeps the reader reading. So in that way, you might have to shape your experience to fit the arc to make it readable, translatable in a reading form, okay? But you don't outright lie about things that happen. Creative nonfiction blurs the boundary between genres, okay? So creative nonfiction tells us what the author feels, where in fiction, the author usually doesn't interject. And in many cases, the fictional protagonist in a piece of fiction doesn't always outright, wouldn't break the fourth wall and tell us how they feel. Whereas in creative nonfiction, since the author is the protagonist, they might take that stance and reveal how they felt about an event. So in Philip Lopate's The Art of the Personal Essay, he says that the personal essay is conversational, often ironic, humorous, and even cheeky in tone. So unless the personal essay, is old, like it comes from the 19th century, your personal essay or readers of personal essay, they prefer more of a conversational tone in the sense that you sound like yourself. Okay, you have it's almost like your voice has a personality, right? And because it has a personality, usually it lends itself to kind of a conversational tone of how you might speak in real life. It values honesty and confession. Self-disclosure is a necessary component. It has a taste for littleness, dwelling on the often ignored minutiae of daily life, while at the same time expanding the importance of the writer's self. So, things that may not seem important to other people might seem very, very important to you. For example, I wrote a piece recently about being lonely, and I used to sit on the grass at school in high school, and I used to pick the grass. Well, in my piece, I zeroed in on picking up the blade of grass and looking at it and feeling the contours of how it felt like, and I really focused on that little thing. And in creative nonfiction, you might do that often, right? Where it doesn't seem like a big event. Like in fiction, sometimes we have these big events that happen to keep the reader reading, but in creative nonfiction, we give meaning, right? We give tension to things that might seem little to other people. Okay. It goes against the grain of popular opinion. Usually it's revealing something or bringing something to light that people maybe didn't know before. It rattles with the stench of ego, trying to reveal the author's true self without seeming narcissistic or proud. So you are talking about yourself a lot in a personal essay. In fact, it's all about you. Sometimes we worry about well, am I showing off if you did something great and you're trying to reveal that? Why would you jump into a creative nonfiction piece at all? Why write about the self? Some people think just talking about yourself too much is a form of ego. But in creative nonfiction, that is what you have to do. You're not trying to be egotistical, but you are writing about the self. It demonstrates the author's learning while distancing itself from the scholarly treatise. So it's not an academic essay, okay? But sometimes you make revelations while you're writing, because you're writing about personal experience, and you might notice things that you had not noticed before. And you're going to reveal that to the reader, right? Because they are going on a journey of self-discovery with you. Perhaps the most important, it is a mode of thinking and being, an attempt to test, to make a run at something without knowing if you are going to succeed. What that might mean, there's so many ways to interpret that. What that might mean is that, kind of like an academic essay, creative nonfiction might include analysis, but it's analysis of events that have happened in your life, whereas you're not analyzing a quote or a piece of evidence to make a specific point in a thesis statement in an English 1A class, right? But you are maybe thinking of yourself as the topic and the thing that's happened to you as the subject with a strong theme. And there might be an unwritten thesis, right? In the piece, a point you are trying to make that is going to involve, setting up scenes that would act as evidence, and then you explaining, the self and what you're coming to terms with now, relating it. If this makes sense, this will become more clear as we move on. But just know that, creative nonfiction blends a lot of genres. Okay. You've got poetry in there. You've got journalism in there. You might have some fiction, various different genres kind of all blend together, and they don't always, but they can make their way actually into creative nonfiction. So go ahead and get a pen and paper out. We're going to do a lot of activities in this section because there's so many ways that you can write creative nonfiction. And I just want us to take a stab at all of them, or not all of them, but as many as we can, right? Because you may find, you might think, hey, I'm not really into creative nonfiction, but there might be a genre of it that strikes a chord with you and makes you realize, oh my, this is actually really good. And that actually happened to me. I started as a poet and I found creative nonfiction, and that seems to be my primary genre right now. So you might be surprised that there is a genre or a form that really speaks to you. So we're just going to try a whole bunch, and in your portfolio, you'll pick one, and that's what you will provide as your portfolio. So go ahead and pick up your pen, set a timer for 5 minutes, and free write for 5 minutes explaining why you are not seeking or otherwise do not practice a certain profession. Okay, so here's a poem by Frank O'Hara where he does just that. He says, why am I not a painter? I am not a painter. I am a poet. Why? I think I'd rather be a painter, but I am not. Well, for instance, Mike Goldberg is starting a painting. I drop in, sit down and have a drink, he says. I drink, we drink. I look up, you have sardines in it. Yes, it needed something there. Oh. I go and the days go by and I drop in again. The painting is going on and I go and the days go by, I drop in. The painting is finished. Where's the sardines? All that's left is just letters. It was too much, Mike says. But me? One day I'm thinking of the color, orange. I write a line about orange. Pretty soon it is a whole page of words, not lines. Then another page. There should be so much more, not of orange, of words, of how terrible orange in life. Days go by. It is even in prose. I am a real poet. My poem is finished and I haven't mentioned oranges yet. It's 12 poems. I call it Oranges. And one day in a gallery, I see Mike's painting called Sardines. Okay, so go ahead and free write why you are not seeking or otherwise do not practice a certain profession. Okay, so organizing creative nonfiction. The word essay comes from the French word essai, which means an attempt. And the essay form is often flexible and exploratory. However, there's a big difference between wandering with a purpose and writing without one. Okay, seems like the difference between a diary and a journal versus a piece of creative nonfiction you would submit to a magazine. So things you might want to keep in mind when you're about to start your creative nonfiction piece. How will you begin? How will you end? What topics or events might you bring up? And what is your theme? Unless you're writing a full-length manuscript, which you won't be for this class, you're just writing a short piece, right? These questions have to have very definitive answers in order for you to fit your experience in the limited space that you have. Telling the truth. Whatever your subject, your reader will expect it to be true. Initially, that might not sound like a difficult demand to negotiate. However, the vagaries of memory, competing interpretations of a single event, and our normal desire to portray ourselves in the best possible light all make telling the truth much trickier than one might think. So go ahead and pick up your pen, set a timer for 5 minutes. Write a list of embarrassing moments that you would be afraid to write about for fear of people knowing. So go ahead and just get it out there. Get used to kind of revealing some things maybe you wouldn't want to. I'm not asking you to do that in your piece. You don't have to reveal big, secrets of your life or your family or anything like that. But to avoid only sharing happy things with the no tension involved, which would make the reader not want to read it, you have to kind of get used to writing about things that make you a little uncomfortable sometimes, or, things you wouldn't normally tell in mixed company. And you will not share this list with anyone, by the way. You could write it down and then burn it, and no one will read it. So go ahead and set a timer, 5 minutes. Just write a list of embarrassing moments. Creative nonfiction is narrative. Many of the elements of fiction make for an entertaining story work equally well in creative nonfiction. True stories are often the most compelling ones, and judicious use of dialogue, scene setting, and character development will aid in bringing your reader inside the world of your essay. Prompt. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Think back to a scene, an exchange between yourself and another person or an event with others that you can recall vividly, that you feel would make a great scene in writing. Shortly summarize the scene and write about what the scene reveals about yourself as a character, your personality, your past, or your view on life. Okay, so one big key in creative nonfiction that is adopted from fiction is scene. You need to show, not tell a lot in creative nonfiction. So this is a very powerful and important prompt. So even if you skipped the others, this one I would not skip. Okay, so think of a scene that has happened, something that is in the now, that would be written in the now, that maybe includes dialogue or action. Okay, so, put the reader in a time and place of an event that happened in your life. Okay, then after you summarize that event in your free write, you need to react to it. Take a step, take some narrative distance away from it, and, make statements about it. Okay, like, what does this reveal about you? Look at yourself as a character, as if you are not the person in the scene, right? And ask yourself, well, what kind of personality do you have? What might your past have been to make you act the way that you did? And what might your views on life be based on what took place in this scene? The poetry of creative nonfiction. Using various elements of poetry can make your creative nonfiction more vivid. From concrete imagery and surprising metaphors to the sounds and rhythms of language itself, many of the aspects of poetry that please readers of verse will also gratify readers of creative nonfiction. We have read Rothko's My Papa's Waltz before, okay? It's the one where the child would come home and quote unquote waltz with his father, and it was a metaphor perhaps for some abuse, okay? You can do the same thing. You can use the waltz metaphor image for an event, not in a poem, but in a piece of prose. So go ahead and you can click that link on the slides and reread the poem to remember what it was about, and try using the waltz metaphor image for an event or an exchange between you and someone close to you in your life in a 3 to 5 minute free write. And maybe try to be poetic in it. It doesn't have to be a poem, just poetic in your language. Writing yourself into creative nonfiction. In creative nonfiction, it's all about you. Really, it is. Even if you're not writing specifically about yourself, your own attitudes and opinions about your subject matter are a crucial component of your essay. Students moving from high school to college often report that their instructors had forbidden the use of the first person pronoun, the I. However, when it comes to creative nonfiction and your professor, point of view is crucial. You can't avoid the I in a piece of creative nonfiction. So here's another prompt. Write your own obituary. Don't use the I because you are not the author. Okay, so to create that distance, to help you switch between being in the moment in a scene and taking a step back and making comments and proposing reflections in response to that theme, practice by stepping outside yourself and try writing your own obituary. If you follow this link, it will take you to a funny obituary. But you can look up obituary on Google and see what ends up in the newspaper or ends up somewhere when a person has died, right? And try writing about your own life that way. And that will help you gain narrative distance. So go ahead, pick up your pen or maybe check out some obituaries and then sit down and for 5 minutes, try drafting one for yourself. Okay, there are many forms of creative nonfiction. One of the most popular and the most widely known is what we would call a memoir. A memoir is a story about one's life that takes place during a specific point in time, right? It spans, maybe a few years. Could span a few days. It could span a decade or more, but it is not an autobiography. An autobiography is, a story that, starts from the very beginning of your life, right? When you're born and ends at, near the end, close to death or just, after when you're much older, okay, usually. It encompasses an entire lifetime. But we're a little too young for that. All of us, even me. Okay. So we're too young. We haven't yet, lived our entire lives. So we're not really going to write an autobiography, or you probably won't. But you would most likely write a memoir, which is about an event or about a decade. Right? I currently am writing a memoir, and it's a coming of age memoir. It starts from when I'm a kid and ends when I'm about 21. Okay. But it doesn't move beyond that. All right. So a memoir is a story retrieved from the writer's memory with the writer as a protagonist, the I remembering and commenting on the events described in the story. Memoir tends to place the emphasis on story, and the point is likely to emerge, as it does in fiction, largely from the characters themselves rather than through the author's speculation or reflection. So a memoir is very similar to fiction. But they are all events that had actually happened, only it is shaped in maybe the shape of what a novel might look like, with scenes and summary and rising and falling action. One of the most famous memoirs was from Frank McCourt. And he wrote a book called Angela's Ashes, and his was also a coming of age memoir about his childhood in Ireland. It is a fantastic book. So amazing. And they even did a movie when the movie was very, very good as well. It's kind of depressing. Here is a chapter, or not a chapter, but the beginning of a chapter of his memoir, Angela's Ashes. Above all, we were wet. Out in the Atlantic Ocean, great sheets of rain gathered to drift slowly up the River Shannon and settle forever in Limerick. The rain dampened the city from the feast of the circumcision to New Year's Eve. It created a cacophony of hacking coughs, bronchial rattles, asthmatic wheezes, consumptive croaks. It turned noses into fountains, lungs into bacterial sponges. It provoked cures galore. To ease the catarrh, you boiled onions in milk blackened with pepper. For the congested passages, you made a paste of boiled flour and nettles, wrapped in a rag, and slapped it, sizzling on the chest. Okay, so note how this paragraph kind of mirrors a lot of what we've been talking about, right? It makes use of a form of language that's almost poetic, right? It's using the sounds of language, asthmatic wheezes, hacking coughs, bronchial, right? So it's using what we would usually do in poetry, right? Have kind of a melodic sense. It is kind of depressing. A lot of memoirs tend to have some kind of depressing element, just because a happy story isn't interesting, right? And so that's what he's focusing on. But this was a very, very good memoir, and I highly, highly suggest it. And one option for your portfolio is to write a short chapter to a potential memoir that you may write. Another very common form, and very much more common than it was maybe 20 years ago, are personal essays. Okay. And it has its origins in something that has happened in the writer's life. But it may be something that happened yesterday afternoon, or it may represent an area of interest deliberately explored. And it is likely to give rise to reflection or intellectual examination. So it is not an academic essay. A personal essay is not that, but it does utilize some forms of academic essay because it includes analysis. A memoir takes more of the form of a novel, right? In rising, falling tension, scenes and showing and all of that, as slowly the point is revealed. Whereas personal essay, it's a about very specific points in time. It's usually short, maybe 10 pages at the longest, right? And it's making a very specific point, okay? Very much like an academic essay. It still utilizes scene and things like that, but it includes more reflection. It allows for that narrator distance, okay? So here's an example of a personal essay, and this is from a girl or a woman who has Tourette's syndrome. Okay, and so her essay is linked here. And she says, "It was not until I was 24, 6 years ago, that I was diagnosed by a psychiatrist in New York with Tourette's syndrome and obsessive compulsive disorder, TS's frequent, often more debilitating partner in crime. Because of the way I look and what most people know, or don't know rather, about these conditions, you would never assign these labels to me unless you were told of them in advance. Even then, I would probably be able to hide anything out of the ordinary and prevent you from believing the truth. After all, I've been doing just that, passing for normal, for most of my life." Okay, so if you are interested in writing a personal essay, this would be a good place to start. You can click on this link and read the rest. I am interested. I want to keep reading, but note how she, revealed a lot of information. It's not in scene. It is very much a traditional introduction. It sets us up for what is about to happen, and it even sets us up with a little bit of a thesis where I've been doing just that, passing for normal for most of my life. You can already kind of predict, kind of like in an academic essay, how this person has been hiding, right? And what have they been hiding, okay? And how they're doing it, and how people see her and how she sees herself. So A lot of you may have heard of David Sedaris. And if you haven't and you are interested in creative nonfiction, you should very much read David Sedaris or listen to him. I've actually seen him read live a couple of times. He is an excellent reader. What's great about David Sedaris is that his voice is so strong, right? And one element or one key feature in creative nonfiction is voice, because you are carrying your personality through words, because you cannot speak, right, for yourself. In that sense, you have to speak through words, but you have to carry the kind of the sound of your voice, or I wouldn't say the sound, but the personality is revealed through language. Okay. And David Sedaris has one of the most strong voices in writing. He's just captured this form and this language and these topics and these themes that are genuinely his. Okay. But he also does a lot of humor. He is kind of like the master of what they call self-deprecating humor, which is making fun of oneself. And he does this masterfully, I would argue. And this is one of the key features also of creative nonfiction. You're not just putting other people under the bus. Sometimes people think, oh, I'm writing a memoir about my family, I'm just going to talk smack about them because they were really bad to me, right? But if the protagonist is a perfect person, right, the reader's not as interested, right? And they may not even start believing them, okay, because they seem too perfect. So go ahead and watch this clip from a live production of This American Life. They invited David Sedaris, and he reads an essay that he has published. Mark Twain says, "The secret source of humor itself is not joy, but sorrow. There is no humor in heaven." So after watching that clip, think of a tragic moment in your own life. In what ways could you make it humorous? Okay, now don't take something maybe so serious that humor would be, horrible to you. Like you're like, I could never imagine this, I would be humorous at this. Maybe don't pick something like that, but pick something that has happened that normally would not be found funny and try to make it funny. Okay, this is what we would call dark humor. For those of you who really love David Sedaris, like I do, you can discover some fascinating things and learn a lot from him by outlining his essays. So if you can find them, they're in the New York Times, they're in New Yorker, he's published widely. You can get his books anywhere. He's got a lot of books out. They're all essays, mostly. So I would suggest, and I've done this myself, find a piece. It doesn't have to be his, but find a piece that you really like. It could be a memoir chapter or a personal essay, and do what they call a reverse outline. It's what I do anyway, where you go through each paragraph and you write on a separate piece of paper, like a nutshell sentence of what the author was doing in that paragraph, or what did they include. And when you're done, you can kind of take a step back and look at it and see the shape of how they told their story. And that can reveal a lot of the techniques of how creative nonfiction is working and how that piece specifically works. And David Sedaris has kind of a formula he follows. A lot of his essays are very similar in the way that they are structured. So I would start, if it were me, I would start with this one. Maybe just listen to this one and, do a reverse outline. Write down an outline of his essay and note how he slowly revealed information for both dramatic and humorous effect. Okay, so there are some very common creative nonfiction genres. The ones that mostly come to people's minds are research-based creative essays. They are kind of a mix between a personal essay and research, or sometimes just research, where the author is researching something and including a bunch of facts, but in a personal way as to make it entertaining. One example is John Krakauer's piece on somebody named Chris McCandless. There is a movie they did on this, and he actually wrote a book called Into the Wild. Okay, it has a fantastic soundtrack from Eddie Vedder. And it's about a guy who graduates college and burns all of his money and then just goes and tries to live his life without any connections with anybody. So that's very fascinating. And what Krakauer does is he writes the story about Chris McCandless, and he inserts himself in there. Like, how can Chris McCandless give not all of us a lesson, but also himself as a traveler? Another common, like we mentioned before, is memoir. It's a slice of life. It's got a very strong theme. You know, maybe you're writing about raising a child with autism, and the memoir only spans a couple of years of life. That would be a memoir. Famous ones, Autobiography of a Face by Greeley. This is about, she had a bunch of surgeries on her face so she could breathe and various other things. And she wrote a memoir about that, about going through life with a face that had been scarred, and how people treated her, and how she had to talk and deal with the surgeries, and she became kind of an addict. It was very, very fascinating, very good. Another one, Orange is the New Black, which you are probably familiar with. That actually, so people think, oh, that's just a Netflix series, but actually it was a memoir called Orange is the New Black by Piper Kerman. Piper Kerman is a real person. And that first season cataloged that or represented that memoir pretty accurately, pretty well, because I've read both the book and seen the show. So if you really liked Orange is the New Black, you should read the book. Or personal essay. Various places you can go to find examples of personal essay. You can go to Brevity Magazine. I've linked it here. Hippocampus Magazine. And Maya Angelou, you may have read this. Maya Angelou wrote an essay about her high school graduation. And another very famous and influential book was Maxine Hung Kingston's No Name Women. This was a Woman Warrior, actually. The book was called Woman Warrior, but there was a very specific essay in it called No Name Woman that is highly anthologized. And so all of them are linked here, and you can access them on the slides on Canvas. And, you know, if I were you, just trying to figure out which genre you might pick for your portfolio or what you'd like to jump into, you know, click on the links and just read a little bit. You know, just shop around, say, well, which speaks to you? What makes you most interested? What piques your interest the most? But creative nonfiction is really malleable, man. There's so many ways you can go about shaping your life into a story people would want to read. And so in this class, I want you to explore and figure out the one that you think would be fun for you or interesting or what you'd like to explore. And so you don't just have to write maybe a short chapter of a memoir. You don't have to write a short essay, okay? You could do something a little bit different. Okay, so I've provided various choices for your portfolio. You could write a perspective for KQED. And if you don't listen to NPR, you might be wondering, what is a perspective? Well, NPR is a radio program, mostly of news, but they have a perspective every morning. And what that is somebody writes a short essay that can, I believe it fits into 2 minutes, and you submit it to that radio program. And if they pick you, they will ask you to narrate and to speak into the phone, and they'll record you and put you on the air. These are well edited. The person who wrote these perspectives really put a lot of thought into what they were saying about the point they were trying to make. So it will take, you know, you to draft it and then revise it. And I do think you should pitch it. You should send it in. That would be great. But you can find those perspectives here. There's one, I think, one every day, 5 days a week. I don't think they have them on weekends, and they collect them. Okay, so you can listen to as many as you want right here to get a sense of what these perspectives are about. Another option is a This American Life pitch. If you're not familiar with This American Life, that's also an NPR program. It essentially takes 3 stories, and they are personal, or they are research-based, or they just play with creative nonfiction, okay? And they all follow one theme. So 3 stories, 1 theme. You will go down the rabbit hole if you go down to This American Life. So if I were you, I would go to This American Life, maybe listen to a few episodes, These are very popular. They're very fun to listen to. And it gives you a good idea of the way that people can approach a theme in radically different ways. Anyway, if you wanted to and you really loved these, you could write an American Life pitch. You could pitch a story to This American Life, and maybe they would produce it for you. Another option is The Moth. The Moth is think of it kind of like a poetry reading, right? There's both live and online versions. Traditionally, it was a live show where you would show up to this big hall. It's usually very packed. There's a stage, and you'd put your name in a hat. And then the host would pick random names out of the hat, and you would have 2 minutes to go up on stage and tell a story from your life. Okay, or actually, I think you have 5 minutes now that I think about it. It's 5 minutes. But in order to get on this, or in order to share that story in a digital format, because they have a digital format that you can listen to them, where, you know, people aren't allowed to go on stage anymore right now because of COVID. So they've put it online, like they have a podcast. If you wanted to tell your story on their podcast, you can give them a 2-minute pitch, right? And if they like your story, they might even help you develop it. So you can, if you want, you could write up your 2-minute pitch that you would want to propose to the Moth and work on it in this class. And then you can pitch it to them, and maybe they would publish your story. Okay, so these are all options that you can pick for this portfolio, because, you know, creative nonfiction is so diverse. You know, it's good to kind of go down that track and see, well, how far can you push this? Right? Now, if you have an idea for a creative nonfiction piece that doesn't fit any of these, it doesn't fit memoir, it doesn't fit personal essay, it doesn't fit a pitch to American Life or a perspective or what have you, and you want to pursue it, let me know, right? Like, say, hey, I've discovered this form of creative nonfiction and I would like to pursue it in this portfolio. Chances are I'll probably approve it, but you have to ask. Okay. Okay. So now that we know of the various options we may have for this portfolio coming up, let's develop our skills in creative nonfiction a bit. Again, one key piece of creative nonfiction is that the I is the narrator, is the protagonist. It's the main character, right? And you have to somehow capture your personality on the page. Okay, so let's practice this by listening to, it is a This American Life episode, but it's oral, you listen to it, about a superpower. Okay, so before we listen to this, I'd like you to answer the question, which is better, the power of flight or the power of invisibility? Which would you choose? Make sure you choose before you listen to this episode. You have to pick one, so pick it. Okay, come what may. So go ahead and pick one. And while you listen to this episode, think about your choice and the assumptions people have about the choice that you made. Think about what kind of person you might be if you had the power of flight or the power of invisibility, and why you picked the one that you picked. How might a reader respond to your answer? What might the process of the writer or producer of this episode have been? Perhaps you wanted to do something like this, do a research-based or interview-based creative nonfiction piece. How did this writer do it? If you were to interview strangers on the street for a piece, what would you ask? Because you could do that. One of your portfolio options is a research-based essay. You could interview people on the street and write an essay about it. So you can access this on Canvas in the slides. You just click on the picture right here and it'll pop up, and it's about 10-15 minutes. Okay, so here's a few more examples of creative nonfiction. One of them is journalism. Okay, now usually, if it's creative nonfiction, the I or you, the person writing it, is still a central character. So keep in mind that whatever you write for this class or for your creative nonfiction unit, it does have that personal element in it. That's kind of what makes it creative nonfiction. If it was just purely nonfiction, there would be no I, right? You would just be shaping facts to make it entertaining for a reader. But because this is creative nonfiction, you do have to have that eye. So, but you can still pull from journalism or the genre of journalism to write your piece, as this person does here. Rachel Aviv is a journalist from the New Yorker, and she uses one person's experience to pique the reader's interest. But note how she includes the I in her interview with this person. Okay, so watch the clip, just press play, and you can watch her reading her piece. And then in response for 5 minutes, imagine you are a reporter for a magazine. What topics would you focus on? Where would you find your story? So if you wanted to interview for your creative nonfiction piece, you would conduct an interview with someone you find interesting and then write a profile of that person. You would want to learn everything you can about the person beforehand. You might even prepare a set of questions for the person using the reporter's questions, such as who, how, why, where, what, and when. These words will help you generate an almost endless variety of queries for your subject. But don't rely only on your written questions. Listen to what your subject is actually saying and ask follow-ups. Use a tape recorder if possible and take notes. Be aware what the person says, but also of how she or he says it. Okay, so tell their story with you as the central character, as the reporter. A lot of memoirs focus on childhood adversity, or just adversity and overcoming an issue, because that lends itself to the shape of fiction that keeps people reading, right? Tension. So here is an example of someone writing a slice of their life. This is a coming-of-age memoir by Gerald Walker. He's a professor at Emerson College and the writer of The World in Flames, which is about his experience growing up in a segregated doomsday cult. Like, way crazy, right? In this piece, he describes the cult's practices from his younger self's perspective. So he's a master at this. He is very, very good at putting himself in the child's perspective. So when you are writing about yourself as a child, right, you have to kind of think of the logic that your child mind had, right? And that helps put the reader there. So note how he does that. He doesn't talk like so much like a child when he's writing, but he limits the perspective of what maybe his brain was thinking at the time in order to describe what was happening. Okay, so this guy is great. Like, I bet you press play on this and you would have a hard time not listening to his whole story. It's so interesting. So after you watch his clip, describe a family custom you feel others aren't familiar with from your younger self's perspective. How did you view your own cultural practice? Okay, so if you are choosing to write your portfolio is like a memoir chapter, and you want to write about yourself as a kid, this is critical. So I would definitely watch this and do this activity if that's what you wanted to do. Here is another essay by him called "Navigating a World That Sees My Black Son's Suffering as Incidental." So if you were interested in writing something, or seeing how he transcends from memoir to personal essay, right? If you liked his voice, if you liked his kind of writing, you could go down to this link and see what he's written there. All right. You could use pictures as prompts. A lot of writers do that, especially creative nonfiction writers. And this person kind of took it really far. Okay. So Sally Mann is a famous photographer. And she wrote Hold Still, a memoir with photographs. And she writes about family scandals and growing up after finding some unknown photographs of her family. Okay. This is very fascinating. This is a great talk that she does. And she shares some pictures in her talk and she reads from her book. So she found all these pictures and she, tries to piece together her childhood based on the pictures that she has. So after you watch this clip, think of your favorite photograph of yourself or your family. Be sure to describe the photographs in detail and use the 5 senses to help recreate the world portrayed in the photos. Write your way into a new perspective. Maybe after writing about the photo, you realize something you had not realized before. Nature writing. This is research-based writing, okay, with the I as, the researcher. So Lisa Knopp has written 6 books in What the River Carries, Encounters with the Mississippi, Missouri, and the Platte. She writes about her love of these rivers. So the whole thing is about rivers and her personal her personal relationship with these rivers. And you think, that can't be that interesting. But, press this link, go to this video and listen to her read, and she makes them come alive through her experience. Okay. So maybe there's a place that you love very much that you'd like to write about, or you'd like to research, right? And share that research with others. This might be the form for you. So if you're interested in nature writing or science writing of some kind with the I as the protagonist, watch her reading her piece, and then take 5 minutes. Look around you for some artifact from the natural world, whether it be a sycamore leaf or a goose feather or a drop of pond water or a landmark, like a river or half dome. Imagine the object carefully, research it, and then write about it with insight and enthusiasm. Another research topic could be history. Maybe you want to research history, right? Something in the past. I didn't put it in here, but I don't know if you have seen Julia and Julia, but it's about the chef and a blogger going through all of her recipes, right? And they made a movie about it, but it started as a blog, okay? And that would be considered creative nonfiction. So I didn't link that here, but maybe I'll put that on Canvas. So if you choose to do historical prompt, you would research a topic, any topic that you have always found fascinating, then write about it in a completely personal way. It helps if you have had some actual contact with your subject. But even if your topic is as distant as the Trojan War, your essay should record your own immediate and individual responses. So here's a couple of examples. Joan Didion slouching towards Bethlehem. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas isn't necessarily a historical prompt, but it does show how somebody goes through experiences and records their life. Trigger warning, a lot of drugs in the Hunter S. Thompson piece. But note his voice is so very distinct, which is mostly the reason I included it. You could write about place. You could revisit a particular place and write an essay about it. According to Stephen Minot, when you select a place you know well, you have at your disposal thousands of details that can help provide a sense of authenticity. So jot down these details as they come to you while you are at the place or from your memory. Next, write an essay surrounding the importance of the place. And here is an example, an essay called A Place to Call Home, about somebody who did just that. Even my memoir, my coming age memoir, is about place in a way, because I moved so often I didn't really have a home, right? So a lot of the chapters focus on where I had lived in a certain place in time. You could be so specific as to write about a house or the home prompt, right? Write about a dwelling you lived in that made a strong impression on you. It could be a house, an apartment, a mobile home, a yurt. Recreate the dwelling by evoking the 5 sentences and describing specific incidents that happened to you while you lived there. And here's another example. It's an essay called The Tourist at Home that does just this. It breaks down a house. Not just the house, but also, I think it was Washington, D.C. It's the city. Somebody left, I believe, to go to college, and they came back and they felt like a tourist in their own home. You could research an ignored event, or by ignored event, I would say, I'd put that in quotes. It's something that you feel has been ignored, right? And that probably you feel people need to know. So do some research about an event that you believe should be better understood, but which has been largely ignored by those who are more concerned with the major players than the big story. So here is an example of an article. It's called The Secret History of Women in Coding. I mean, just look at the title. Secret history. It is an ignored events that have occurred and almost, wiped away. People tend to think that, coders are men, or, it's dominated by men. And that's true. It is. But in the beginning history of when computers really started taking off, women were at the forefront of developing them and programming them. So these are by no means all of your options. You could do all sorts of different things. There's so many ways to write a creative nonfiction piece. There's so many genres or ways to take it. So I'm going to leave it up to you and to do some research on your own, right? To find something that you think would be a good fit for you, of something you would like to pursue in this unit. And it's a short unit, again, because it's borrowing from things we've already learned. And it's a shorter piece. This piece is only 3 pages, 3 to 5 pages. So kind of taste the different versions of the kinds of things that you might want to write about, the topics or the themes you might want to explore, and go for it. Have fun. Your journals also set you up for developing whatever piece you want for your portfolio. Okay, so those will help you write a draft.